All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Welcome to CHD Wise, which is an education series for patients and families. My name is Rebecca Acosta, and I'm the education coordinator here at Conquering CHD, and I'll be moderating this evening's panel. Tonight's topic of discussion is breastfeeding and CHD in honor of National Breastfeeding Month. This webinar is being presented live, and we're also recording it for future viewing on our website. Joining us today are a panel of experts from Ann and Robert Lurie Children's Hospital Heart Center, which is located in Chicago, Illinois. Lurie is leading the way, supporting families who wish to breastfeed their CHD babies, including serving as a location in the current clinical trial involving single ventricle infants and breastfeeding, which is being held by Prolacta Bioscience. Dr. Sheetal Patel is a pediatric cardiologist and the chief of fetal and neonatal cardiology at Lurie. She works with families from prenatal diagnosis through infancy to ensure those who wish to breastfeed are as successful as possible. Dr. Cate Collins is a pediatric cardiologist and intensivist who works in the cardiac ICU. She and her colleagues partner with the nursing team to facilitate breastfeeding as soon as possible for all infants with CHD. Michelle Steltzer is a pediatric nurse practitioner who has specialized in congenital cardiology and surgery for 20 years. Her focus is on nutrition, breastfeeding, and growth in babies with CHD, especially those with single ventricle anatomy. Michelle currently works in Lurie's Single Ventricle Center of Excellence and with the Interstage Home Monitoring Program. Supporting families through the first year of their child's life is her passion. Nicole Heilemann is the nursing coordinator for fetal cardiology at Lurie. She led the fetal team in creating several video resources which address the most common breastfeeding questions from CHD families. Nicole teaches her families that breastfeeding a baby with CHD may look different, but it's not impossible, and she is here to support you. Katie Burnley is a cardiothoracic nursing coordinator and certified breastfeeding counselor. She updates families as their loved ones are in the operating room, moving through recovery, and upon arrival in the ICU. She assists new moms with milk production, pumping, breastfeeding, and any needed support during the child's hospitalization. Ms. Abby Jones is a licensed pediatric speech-language pathologist and board-certified lactation consultant. She has worked with children from birth to teens with a variety of diagnoses impacting speech, language, and feeding development. She now specializes in the diagnosis and treatment of feeding disorders in premature infants and medically complex neonates. Monica Zoltowski has been a registered nurse for over 10 years and the manager of patient care operations in the cardiac unit at Lurie for the last 5 years. She is also a certified breastfeeding counselor and works on the unit supporting new moms. And last but certainly not least, we are thankful to have Miss Edith Prado on the panel tonight. She is the proud mom of Eliana, who was born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome and is now 17 months old. She was successfully breastfed with the support of the Lurie team. Each panelist has a few moments of information to share to further introduce themselves, and then they will answer questions that were submitted by the community prior to the webinar. For all of those attending live, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to pose questions through the presentation, and we will address those live at the end of the webinar. I will now turn it over to Dr. Patel, who will share some information about Lurie. If you could unmute yourself, Dr. Patel.
There you go. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. And thank you, Rebecca, for inviting us for this very important topic, especially August being National Breastfeeding Month. This is the perfect timing to discuss this. I wouldn't take a whole lot of time, but I just wanted to give a brief overview of who we are and what we do. Here at Lurie Children's Fetal Cardiac Program, we have a team of members to support all the families with a prenatal diagnosis of congenital heart disease. As all of the members of CHD Wise would know, that it truly takes a village to take care of these families. Our team includes 11 fetal cardiologists, our nurse coordinator, Nicole, who's also on the panel, also the cardiac ICU attendings, the single ventricle program, the social worker, etc. Many team members who all come together to provide this comprehensive and patient-centered care when the families have this diagnosis of congenital heart defect in their unborn child. So we definitely want to have the discussion and promote the breastfeeding during the fetal counseling if the family chooses to breastfeed after baby's born. We realized when we were talking with the families, getting their feedback about the program, is that the families felt very comfortable and knowledgeable in their baby's cardiac defect, but when it came to the breastfeeding, they either didn't ask, felt comfortable asking us those kind of questions, or didn't feel as prepared as they would like to be. So when that came to us about 2 years ago, we spent a lot of time thinking about how to improve that, and then came these breastfeeding education videos that we put together, and Nicole was key in coordinating all that, and we are very thankful to our specialists, Katie, Monica, and Abby to give their knowledge and share their expertise and do these video recordings that are very helpful. And we made that open to public so that anybody who is looking for this kind of resource can gain some knowledge about it, so that they feel more comfortable.
Dr. Mute went back on. There we go.
So here, if we can go one more slide, Rebecca. So in our fetal cardiology program, we want to provide this comprehensive care, and we usually see these families 2 to 3 times, which provides us time to discuss the introduction to their fetal cardiac diagnosis, and also when we start doing postnatal action planning and then long-term care consult discussion, that's when we introduce the concept that, hey, if you would like to have breastfeeding your child, this is the time, these are the videos that you can watch and be ready. So that, along with other things that we are discussing, we make the breastfeeding as part of that discussion as well. And if we can go to the next slide. Michelle here is a key member in our single ventricle long-term program, and as you can see in the interstage period, a lot of questions arise, because that's when the families are trying to breastfeed, and they provide the resource for that duration of the time that if families would want to breastfeed. Then if we want to go to the next slide. Here are all the locations. For people who are around Illinois, they might recognize some of the location, but our goal is to provide care near to their home if possible. But certainly we have all the services at the Lurie Children's Main Hospital. And then with that in mind, the last thing that I wanted to mention to the community was that on the Lurie Children's website, we have housed all of our videos of providing the education about breastfeeding on the Lurie website, so that anybody could watch at whenever they are free to watch. And please feel free to share these videos. These are meant for global CHD community and not protected or reserved for Lurie families by any means. So thank you for attending. I would now hand over to the expert panelists.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share before we move to the Q&A part of the event? I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And then for those of you that are watching live in your Zoom, it'll probably be best if you put it into gallery view so you see all of the speakers at once on your screen. So now that we've heard from the wonderful experts, we really want them to answer some of the questions that you all submitted before the webinar was scheduled. When our community asked, or excuse me, when we asked our community, what do you want to know about breastfeeding and CHD? The comments came in fast and furious. Over 200 comments were received in a matter of 72 hours. And many of families answered, we want to know everything. But considering time constraints, we curated a top 10 list. And so I'm just going to shoot out a question and I will allow the experts to answer. So our first question that was quite popular is how do moms of babies with CHD maintain a milk supply when they're under such intense stress? Who wants to tackle that one?
Yeah,
I'm gonna go ahead and answer that. In my experience, at least, I guess the number one priority is to understand your own way of dealing with stress, which is the first thing. At least that's the way that I started out with, was knowing exactly what I could do, which was me personally, was to do things that I can only control, and then I do things that I can't. I let them go and then let it take its toll, and then ask questions as it went. If something was stressing me out, I would ask. If there's a nurse nearby, I would ask them whatever they knew. And that's how I dealt with my stress. So that's one of the biggest things that I would tell a breastfeeding mom, or that's planning to do it, is know yourself, know how you deal with your stress, and then go from there, dealing with it little by little. I mean, it can be stressful, really stressful, because you're not thinking about yourself, you're thinking about your baby. You want to breastfeed, you want to, you might have to pump for a while. So those things will help you, and you will find your support system. And it definitely is really nice that, at least with me, all of the nurses that were near me and my baby were so supportive of helping me with while I was trying to pump, and giving me the tools that I needed at that time. So it definitely has a lot to do with knowing how to deal with your own stress.
I think to kind of piggyback off of Edith, I think that a lot of moms, in my experience, have felt kind of like, what can I do? And pumping and trying to breastfeed is always one way that they felt like they were doing something for their baby, which was really nice, I think, and helped a little bit with the stress. So I would just say it is definitely something that is beneficial to your baby. So trying to breastfeed and pump whatever you need to do to make milk for your baby is a way of you feeling like contributing to your child.
Edith, can I just ask a question? I know you very well, but can you share your story? Is, your daughter, was she your first? Did you go into the pregnancy knowing that you were planning to breastfeed? Can you give a little perspective of that?
So my baby is actually my second child. And I knew I wasn't successful with my first baby breastfeeding, but I knew that that was from the beginning that I wanted to try again. And giving that Eliana was also had this condition, it just drove me even more to provide her with that. And breastfeeding is one of the biggest things that I feel like helped my baby thrive, especially where she is now. Even if it wasn't breastfeeding, but at least pumping, giving her as much as I could. There was times where I couldn't meet her expectations of as to how much milk she needed. Sometimes I was low. There was 2 days where she wouldn't get breast milk from me because I wasn't pumping enough for her to receive. So those things, as time went by, it just kept driving me to keep trying to do what was best for her at the end.
I think another area that I think mothers can do is preparation. So for our families that do have prenatal diagnoses, they can gather information, they can kind of set expectations about what might happen after birth in terms of pumping or breastfeeding. And I think if moms kind of know what their plan is after birth, that might help to at least establish a plan in place. The plan can always be adjusted. We can always change that plan at any point. But I think having the preparation and knowing what your goal might be after birth and what things you can do to get ready for that will perhaps help to at least get you started down the breastfeeding path, whether it's pumping or putting baby directly to breast. And then we can always adjust and support as that journey continues.
I'd say from my perspective as one of the doctors in the ICU, we do as much as possible to make sure there's a lot of skin-on-skin contact. And with most babies, that's definitely a possibility. And that can help with your supply. And we try to allow the baby to go to breast when it is safe. And everyone in my group, I have 11 other colleagues, we're all very focused on that and know that's important for many moms. And then I agree with what Edith said, just control what you can control, which for the most part is drinking water and resting when you can and eating and taking walks, and hopefully have trust in your medical team that they're taking very good care of your baby. And so you need to take care of yourself in this early time period when everything's so new and different.
Thank you all so much. So our next question came in a few different pieces, and I got the feeling that the community at large assumes that breastfeeding after a baby's open heart surgery is not possible or very rarely successful. So the question then is, how successful is breastfeeding after a baby's open heart surgery, and what positions or other tricks or advice do you have to make it successful for these moms?
I'll chime in a little bit. There are very few studies about success rates, and it certainly will vary depending on what type of heart lesion that your baby has. There's such a huge spectrum, so it's a little bit difficult to generalize to any baby with CHD. But we certainly do our best to promote breastfeeding, and I would say many parent baby couples are successful, and the nursing is key in getting the baby to breast early. And at least in our unit, I'd say we try to be very flexible, and even if you perhaps have a catheter going directly into the heart, nothing is a hard no that we can't try breastfeeding or can't let the mom hold the baby. So we're hoping that some of this flexibility and expertise from our nursing colleagues helps promote more of our mothers be successful.
I also wanted to add, so at least in my case, Eliana, she wasn't able to go right away on the breast because she had a vocal cord. One of her vocal cords was a little injured during surgery, which is something common that happens during surgery. But that didn't stop me from putting her on the breast. It didn't stop any of the nurses from telling me, no, you can't breastfeed her. No, it was trying to get her on the breast, just not too much of her actually sucking, because, you know, she was still working on the movements. She's trying to recuperate. But I mean, another thing that after that, when she got better, we had therapists, speech therapists that were coming in and out of every other day to check on her, to see how she was doing, if the baby could actually, you know, suck and actually drink and swallow properly. So there's a lot of things that can happen, but I mean, Eliana fully breastfed, so it is completely possible to do. She was 4 months after her second surgery, and she completely left. She didn't have to go through an NG tube anymore. So I encourage every parent out there not to stop there. It may take some time, but don't give up, because it can happen. Eliana is still breastfeeding, and she's thriving every day. So I would definitely encourage you not to stop. listen to your nurses, listen to your physical therapists, occupational therapists, and especially your speech therapists, because they will tell you what is okay. And you can, and being a mom, you just have that instinct as a mom, like, it's okay, it's not okay. You know, you don't want to hurt your baby, but you can listen to them too. That, you know, they'll might have like a small cry here and there, and you just know that they might not be ready yet. That's my answer.
I'd like to tag onto what Edith just said, because you made a great point. A lot of times breastfeeding is not possible at certain points along the journey for various reasons. But one thing that Edith did a wonderful, fantastic job of was keeping her supply up so that she was ready when her baby was ready. We can always work to getting baby to the breast at any point, and we can work really hard with the family to help support the breastfeeding at different stages throughout pre-surgery, after surgery, even interstage as well. So it's never too late to try.
I echo that completely. And I just want to like piggyback on a couple thoughts that, you know, Cate and Abby and Edith had said, is that, you know, it's always possible. It's never a hard no. We don't have a lot of data about it, but I am surprised all the time with how successful kids are. And we just have to continue to tell our stories and work with people. There was, to give you an example, there was a baby, and I've always cared for breastfeeding I'm old, I'm 50, and I've cared for kids 20 years plus. You know, back when I first became a nurse practitioner and then moved to New England, I remember there was a little boy who never latched before going home, was in our interstage program, and we had a ton of patients, and he came back for his Glenn, and I knew him, but didn't actually care for his interstage care because he was assigned to somebody else in Boston. And I didn't know him. He was a big, chunky kid, and he fully breastfed. And, you know, I wrote that story up because it was important. I had never seen somebody, and I wanted that story told. And Edith is another example of that story. She struggled, you know, with breastfeeding, but she still tried to encourage that relationship and bringing to breast and doing what she could, listening to the nurses, the providers and things like that. And look at her. I mean, she has been an amazing mom, promoting, you know, breastfeeding, all this breast milk, and her child has thrived, like the biggest, chunkiest kid in a good, healthy way. Like this is good stuff. And we just don't, like Cate said, we don't have all these stories. And I will tell the story to whoever wants to listen, but it is possible. And we just have to work together, and every child is different. No congenital heart lesion is like another. And we just have to work at it. And it is a lot of work. And Edith, I'm sure you can, echo that it is, but it's worth it.
Thank you for that. Most of you don't know, but I built my family through adoption. So I didn't birth or breastfeed any children. So I'm learning along with you all this evening. And I think it's just absolutely amazing what I've learned from the panel, and especially Edith. And I agree with the sentiment that we just need to continue sharing these breastfeeding success stories so that becomes the norm and not the stress and the worry and the concern that they can't. So with that, I think this question might be more for those that are specific breastfeeding counselors. For patients and families that are not near Lurie, what community-based resources are usually available in most towns? Should they ask for support groups or certain kinds of classes? What are the buzzwords that they should know to ask for supports in their community?
I think most delivery hospitals should have a breastfeeding course for expectant parents, and that's a great place to start for a lot of families, just to gather some basic information. Even though if you have a prenatal diagnosis, your path might look a little bit different, it's still a resource that's available. There are some wonderful online resources like the La Leche League, which promotes breastfeeding that is available to all families online. And then also the resource videos that I know Dr. Patel shared earlier, things like that might be helpful for parents to view as well.
Yeah, I just to tag along with that, the resource videos would be a good start. And then I would say that when we provide the fetal counseling, it's a stressful situation. So initially, at least, the stress is high, and therefore families may not ask about breastfeeding. But I would say once you have the preliminary information, and ask your providers to see what other resources are there in your setting, because I'm sure there are resources, but we, as a provider, we may not think about that or talk. I know a few years before I was so, kind of aware about this breastfeeding, I didn't, directly ask the families what their wishes were or how I can support them. So I would say one message is ask your clinicians and your people that you're working with that what resources are. The second thing is that after you watch the videos, if you have any questions, you feel free to email us, and we'll be happy to connect you with the specialist or get you answers. So along with videos, there is also email that you can email us any further questions.
Thank you. That's a pretty big offer to support families around the country. I think that's amazing. The next question is, how common is supplementing or fortifying one's breast milk? How common is the use of formula instead of breast milk? And is it better to supplement or fortify versus using formula?
I think from my standpoint, we certainly will use any breast milk that's available and use that first and foremost. But it is very common that babies need a supplementation, sometimes in the form of formula that's added to the breast milk, because babies with congenital heart disease often need more calories to grow because their heart works inefficiently. So it's very common, but I would say any amount of breast milk that the mother is able to produce is worthwhile, and we're always happy to use it. And I would also mention, this is separate from that the question, but even if the baby is not allowed to eat because of their heart disease or some other medical condition going on, we still use colostrum and breast milk for the oral care. And so they can begin to receive the benefits that will be absorbed through their oral mucosa, even in the very early stages, even if they're getting nutrition through their IV. So we'll take it all, every drop.
Thank you. The next couple of questions really for me look like they are circling around how should a mom or a family build their team and their support team and if they're planning to breastfeed. Who should they be asking for at their delivery or immediately after their delivery? What specialists? What other bonding activities can they do with their baby if they're not immediately breastfeeding? And then how can families who receive a postnatal diagnosis and are in kind of crisis can even consider breastfeeding and work that into their plan? What are your tips and tricks and suggestions there?
I think specialist-wise, at your delivery hospital, lactation consultants usually are available. And then once you're at a specialty hospital for your cardiac diagnosis, our speech therapists like Abby are fantastic, a great resource, as well as certified breastfeeding counselors, which in our hospital is a lot of our actual bedside nurses. So just, telling your bedside nurse that you're interested in what your goals are with breastfeeding kind of gets the word out, and they can bring someone in to you as the mom and talk about, what your goals are and kind of how to start the journey of breastfeeding and pumping for your baby. I think tagging along with that, having, and this sort of answers both questions, but also for moms that get a postnatal diagnosis, I think having the chance to advocate for yourself and ask for a breast pump if you're not able to be with your baby right away is the best way to start that successful journey, or getting baby to breast as soon as possible if that's a possibility. Then when you have those specialists, they can help support moms to establish their milk supply, provide some supports that maybe are ways for moms to bond with their baby. So we mentioned earlier skin to skin care, sometimes it's called kangaroo care. We will encourage moms to have the baby nuzzle at the breast, maybe having baby practice latching to a breast that's been recently pumped. Cate mentioned using colostrum and breast milk for oral care, which is a standard practice that we do in our unit. And then also offering the colostrum and breast milk through a feeding tube if that's the way baby's getting nutrition at the time.
Great. The last couple questions are really about advocating for themselves. These are questions from moms. And one of the biggest themes that I had in all the comments was from moms who exclusively pump instead of actually baby to breast. They feel like they often get left out of the breastfeeding conversation. So how common is it in your experience for babies with CHD to be exclusively bottle fed or through a tube feeding versus on the breast directly? And then what are your words of advice to that community? That's a hard one, I know.
Right. It can be common. Again, every baby's journey is different, and every parent's journey is different. Even in babies without congenital heart disease, I think you'd get a wide variety of answers, and lots of moms have success with exclusive pumping, and other moms are able to breastfeed. And it's actually the same in congenital heart disease. I would say that some moms are only going to be able to exclusively pump, and that's completely wonderful. And that is a huge sacrifice, and those moms should be applauded because that is very, very tough. And then other moms will have some success with breastfeeding, which again is its own feat. So I don't know that I can put a number to it, but I would say that moms who end up pumping some or all of their child's nutrition should not feel bad about that at all. And in fact, they should feel very, very proud of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I echo what Cate said. And I think, you know, it's hard to say the numbers, but I also think like you have to put it in context, like of what's going on at the time. A baby who is having some kind of intervention in the neonatal period is probably going to struggle a little bit more. And I say struggle lightly in that, like, you know, there's going to be some delay in starting feeding. There's going to, as we assess and try to figure out what's going on with the baby, try to help support the baby in the best way. And, you know, we try to support as best we can, but it doesn't replace the oral feeding that babies start to learn initially. And so it sort of delays that. And so kids may need a little bit of support a little bit longer, but I would never say an absolute, like, this is going to be, you know, what you're going to need for going home. Like you're going to go home with an NG tube or whatever. Like we can always work towards that breastfeeding. But we also have to medically be aware of what else is going on around in the environment. And like Edith had the experience with her daughter with a vocal cord concern. And that's not a safe experience with feeding. So we had to wait and allow some time for healing. But she's a perfect example of how you can be persistent and have that be a successful outcome. And I'm so proud of everything that she's done. And we can learn so much from those moms that are successful. And I'm so grateful that you're sharing it, Edith, today.
I also wanted to add, while I was pumping, because I was pumping for so long, I found many Facebook groups that are strictly only for pumping moms. There are so many more people out there that just strictly pump, and their kids are almost 2-3 years old and they're still pumping. Maybe that's a lot for some people, maybe it's not, but I mean, if you think about it, I mean, there's still those moms that are still pumping and giving their baby their breast milk. And so I would tell a mom that, you know, is struggling breastfeeding their baby to don't give up just because your baby doesn't want to breastfeed and they prefer bottle. It's okay. You're not the only person that is having that difficulty breastfeeding the baby, but you're giving them everything that you can provide the baby at that time. And so I would encourage you to also look up in Facebook groups of just breastfeeding breast pumping moms that are out there. There's a name actually for it, and they give you tips and tricks that works for them. And believe me, I tried them. Especially during the time that I couldn't provide Eliana with enough milk. There was, like I said previously, there was a point where I was so stressed, and I was thinking, I was like, okay, well, there's 2 days now. It's been 2 days, and I haven't given her enough breast milk. And I remember one of the nurses there at Lurie said, Edith, it's okay. Whenever you get milk, you're going to give it to her. Even if it's a little bit, it helps. And I just kept thinking, okay, I'm just going to keep going, and I'm just going to let it go. And if I don't get no more milk, then, you know, that's what it is going to be. I'm not going to leave my baby without food because I can't provide her. But eventually I still kept getting milk. It was just that one day, those 2 days that I just couldn't provide it to her. But it came back up, and sometimes it happens. And I remember looking up these pages, and I found them, and they really did help. One of the biggest things that I drank was oat milk. I didn't know it existed. Believe me, there's a lot of things I didn't know existed, but oat milk helped. So I would encourage you not to give up and not to feel like you're the only one pumping.
That's great advice, and I think it really flows into the very last question that we have. A lot of parents whose babies are unable to breastfeed for a medical reason or otherwise, for those families, what advice do you have for the moms and advocating for themselves or explaining to family members or other medical providers that their baby cannot breastfeed without divulging the whole, you know, everything about their medical history and their condition? What advice do you have for those families? I've stumped them.
That's a really tough question. That's really tough. And it's knowing your audience, I think, and how much you want to share. And, you know, and having comfort with yourself in, you know, what you're able to bring to your child. And it's hard, and there's no judgment either way. You know, like if you can breastfeed, if you can only pump and provide the breast milk, or if, you know, you decide to stop at 3 months, you know, like there's no judgment along the way. You've done the most that you could do for your child. And I think it really depends on the audience and how comfortable you are in yourself. I don't know if I have a patented answer. I don't think I answered the question. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's a really hard one.
No, it's a really hard question. I used to get questioned all the time, going to the hospital or, you know, needing to go pump you know, every 2 hours having to pump for Eliana. And obviously I didn't have Eliana with me. So even the questions were even higher. Like, why are you pumping? And, you know, you need a pump? You have a baby? And I would think like, yeah, I do. I pump for my baby because that's the best way. That's the best way I can provide for her when she's not here. Or when I did have Eliana, I was very firm and I would say, this is the only way that I can provide for her right now. And they would say, well, what's wrong with her? I rather not speak about it and just move on. I mean, one of the biggest things is to be very firm. And they won't ask you more questions because they can see it in your face, or sometimes they would even see Eliana's food, the bag that had the milk, and they're just kind of like wondering, why does she have an NG tube? Why does she have? So when I would say I need a pump, I mean, they wouldn't ask any more questions. And if I was very firm about what my beliefs, then they wouldn't ask any more questions. So that's the way I took care of it. At least not to divulge everything about my baby. Unless, of course, it was someone that I knew and, you know, they didn't know that Eliana was born with that situation, then I would, you know, talk about it. But otherwise, just be very, very firm and what you believe in.
That's great advice. As a patient advocate, that's what I want to hear. So it makes me very happy. That was the questions that were submitted before the webinar. And while we've been talking, we've had one question that was posed in the Q&A chat that Dr. Collins answered, but I wanted to read it out loud so everybody that's following this on the recording afterwards gets to hear the answer. The question is, how do we change the view that some cardiologists have, or help mothers fight the idea if they come up against pushback that single ventricle babies can't directly breastfeed at all? How do we fight that stigma that it's a hard no from some doctors? Cate, did you want to answer that again, or I know you typed in there, but.
Sure. So I just recommended that you try to meet with the cardiologist before delivering and just have an open discussion about it. I know certainly in our fetal clinic that Dr. Patel is the director of, that's perfectly acceptable and a conversation that we want to engage in ahead of time. And if you're finding that the provider isn't sharing your values about breastfeeding, then I think it's perfectly acceptable to continue your search for a cardiologist that you do connect with and who does share your values about breastfeeding. And those cardiologists are out there, and I think they're becoming more and more prevalent. So I think, or I hope that everyone could find someone that will help them along their journey.
I also want to piggyback off of that for a second too. Also make sure that when you are meeting with your team, especially prenatally, that you're letting them know that this is a big goal of yours and this means a lot to you. And similarly to what Dr. Collins said, make sure that their goals align with your goals. There's going to be somebody out there who's going to agree with you and want to help you and want to support you. So always make sure, advocate for yourself, tell them that that means a lot to you. It means a lot in your journey, and that's one of your major goals if that is what it is.
Thank you, that's excellent. And actually I missed a question from the community before, I'm so sorry. So the last question that was submitted before the webinar is, how can I breastfeed my baby with CHD who also has a tongue tie or lip tie issue?
I'll take a stab at this one. Tongue and lip ties are a pretty hot topic in the infant feeding world these days. I would recommend that you work with the feeding therapist in your unit at your hospital to really evaluate your baby and to see if those concerns are affecting the way that your baby is feeding and if it's affecting your breastfeeding success. At our hospital, we do have ear, nose, and throat doctors that we can consult with if we feel like the tongue tie or perhaps a lip tie is impacting a baby's success, and we can have them help us to determine if a revision procedure might be necessary and if that's possible.
Great, thank you. That's all I have. I think I've thrown every question at you that I can, and we don't have anything else that's coming through on the live Q&A. So I'm going to share my screen one more time, just so that folks can see a slide of all of the resources that we've been talking about. Here are the links for you. So you should be able to see the links to the resources at Lurie, both on their website and on their YouTube channel. And then if you're interested in more of the clinical trial side of what's going on with breast milk and CHD babies, there are some information at Proactive Bioscience. And then there at the bottom is the Conquering CHD resources for patients and families. And then the website for this CHD Wise series and that is where this recording will be housed. So it's Tuesday. So hopefully by the end of day Thursday, this will be up and families can link to it, download it, and review it however works for them. So with that said, I want to say thank you absolutely to our panel of experts and to Edith and Eliana. I saw her in the beginning before we went live. You guys as the expert panel, you're really sharing your time and talents and really changing the landscape and sharing these successful breastfeeding stories, I think is really important for our community. So really on behalf of the staff and the volunteers at Conquering CHD, we really appreciate your collaboration and partnership. And hopefully something will come across our table again and we can work together soon. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. And if you have any follow-up questions, please email us at chdwise@conqueringchd.org, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Rebecca.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.